Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this Textile Talk podcast. I'm Gail Cowley, and I'll be your host today. Joining me is Sarah de Rousset-Hall, who is a hand embroidery artist and teacher. Just to give you a little bit about a background on Sarah before we start our chat. Sarah works as a tutor for the Royal School of Needlework and runs her own embroidery business called Sarah Stitches. She came to embroidery as a second career, but has been embroidering as long as she can remember. Following on from a cancer diagnosis when she was aged 30, she returned to being a student a few years later to turn her hobby into a profession. Sarah graduated from RSN's Future Tutor programme in 2020 and has been working as a professional embroiderer ever since, teaching, developing kits and working on art pieces and commissions. In 2021, she became a Liveryman of the Worshipful Company of Broderers and a Freeman of the City of London. In 2022, Sarah exhibited 3 art pieces at Broderers Exhibition, the Art of Embroidery at the Bankside Gallery in London, and she's currently working on pieces for their next exhibition in 2025. In 2023, Sarah was honoured to be part of the embroidery studio team at the Royal School of Needlework, who worked on a number of items for the coronation of their Majesties, King Charles III and Queen Camilla, including the Queen's robe of estate, the anointing screen and the stole royal. Sarah lives in West Sussex with her husband and has 2 cats who occasionally make appearances in her online classes. Thank you so much, Sarah, for agreeing to come onto the podcast. I'm really delighted to be able to speak to you this morning. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
So the first thing that I would like to ask is if you could give us a little bit of an introduction to you, about your background perhaps, and how you came to needlecraft would be a really useful way of setting the scene for our listeners.
Okay, so I'm Sarah de Rousset-Hall. I am an embroidery artist and teacher, and I live down in West Sussex. I came to embroidery as a second career. So before doing my training at the Royal School of Needlework, I used to work in the corporate world. So I ended up in IT procurement for large international corporations, which was, I was quite good at it and it was rather fun, but not terribly creatively engaging. So when I was 30, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And that sort of somewhat shifted my perspective on life, shall we say.
I'm sure.
So I went back to work. I had 18 months off for my treatment. And during that time, I'd always done embroidery as a hobby, but I picked up cross stitch to do whilst I was having my treatment because it gave me something to do, but it wasn't exhausting. And it just became something that I kept doing from then onwards. If I wasn't in work, and sometimes when I was in work, I would have I would have a hoop with me, and that was how I used to relax at the end of a stressful day. So it became a bigger and bigger part of my life. And a few years later, I finished my treatment. I went back to work. I threw myself back into work. And unsurprisingly, I burnt myself out. And at that point, I was like, I can't do this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I need to change something about my life. And the obvious choice was embroidery. And it so happened that I went to a class at the RSN with one of our fabulous tutors, Shelley Cox. It was a 3-day white work class. I dragged my sister along, but it was the best decision I ever made because my sister, being the wonderful lady that she is, found a flyer for the Future Tutors program, and she went, "Sarah, you should do this." And I said, "Don't be ridiculous, Kate. I have a mortgage. I can't possibly go and do something like that." But I'd really, really enjoyed the class. I'd always enjoyed embroidery. I was getting more and more into it. And it was one of those things that it just sort of stuck with me. And over the sort of the next few months, I was like, actually, I think this is a really, really good idea. It will give me a break. It will give me creative outlet, and I think I could be really good at it in that sort of slightly naive way that sometimes you approach things. And so yeah, I quit my job. Well, I applied first and got into the program, but I quit my job. I was living in Ireland at the time, so we moved back from Dublin to London to start the course. And yeah, that's how it all began, really.
My goodness. It's so interesting to hear from you that you came to it. Not that I think 30s later in life, but it isn't straight from school, is it? It isn't straight from sort of full-time education into training as such. A change of pace for you.
It was. So by the time I started on the course, I was 36. So yeah, cancer diagnosis at 30. A few years later, I started the course. And yeah, it was quite a big transition, because it had been a long time since I was a student, and I was used to being the expert in the room. I had a successful career. I was good at it. I was often the person that people would turn to ask the awkward and complicated questions. And then all of a sudden, I'm not working. Well, I'm still working quite long hours, but not as much as I was in the corporate world. But I'm the apprentice. I'm the student. I'm the one who knows nothing. And that was, yeah, it was a tricky transition. I'm sure my tutors who were there at the time would probably have some more to say about that as well. But yeah, it was pretty tough to go from being the expert to the person who knows nothing.
Yeah, I do know a little about that myself, to be honest, because I went from being a City and Guilds tutor into doing both foundation degree in art and design, and then going on to do a degree in design. And it's a very different emphasis, very different. And as you say, I was often the one, they suspected I actually might technically know more than them. And they made life really quite difficult for me. Some did, and some said, "Oh, Gail, can you carry on and take this class?" So it was a very strange, a very weird transition, sort of in my 30s, in my early 30s. It was odd. So I completely understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, it was, but I still say it's the best decision I ever made. It was scary as well to, half our income and make a big transition in terms of moving house and everything, but I don't regret it for a second.
That's great, isn't it? Because again, I think it's something that a lot of the students that come to us for courses are thinking about doing. They're thinking about making that move. Often, perhaps, it can be a different trigger for everyone, but sometimes it's when they've perhaps had children are young, and they've taken a bit of a break. They've perhaps picked up some embroidery or some knitting or whatever in the evenings when they have to be in, and then they start and think about making that move. But as you say, it's scary.
It is very scary, and it's hard as well. Making a living as a creative professional is not easy, and you have to work to find work. And if I'd always worked for a company. I had a monthly paycheck. Everything was quite predictable in that sense. And then suddenly shifting to being effectively, then a student and then a freelancer, it's a very, very different mindset of, I can't just rely on the fact that but at the end of the month my pay is going to come in. Everything has to be a little bit more carefully sort of thought through and planned.